So this is an old coffee table from the 80s or 90s that was at my husband's workplace and was going to be thrown away, but he stepped up and brought it home. It's not my style at all, and I've thought about redoing it for years. Then I saw this challenge that Jan at Copper Cactus DIY was having called the Beach Please Challenge. The challenge is to restyle a piece into a beachy or nautical theme. Sounds like fun. Let's get started. I began by cleaning the piece, scrubbing it thoroughly using my Rust-Oleum spray degreaser and some soapy water. And then afterwards I rinsed everything off, and wow, this table was dirty. I had my trusty assistant help me to carry it over to dry in the sun. This coffee table has solid oak legs, but the top is MDF covered with a veneer printed with a faux wood grain. I definitely want to keep the solid wood, so thinking in terms of a beachy vibe, I'm thinking whitewash instead of stain. I started off by sanding with 100 grit sandpaper. I used 3 sanding tools on this table. For rounded areas, I used my orbital sander using a foam interface pad. For flat areas, I used a detail sander, and then I did a lot of hand sanding as well in the places that the electric sanders couldn't reach. I sanded quite a bit on this, getting these legs down to bare wood. I'm wearing my respirator, and sometimes it is so hot it gets fogged up inside my sanding mask, and I need to just stand in front of the fan. Mississippi in late August, early September, the heat is no joke. But back to sanding. I did the hand sanding using my little foam gator pad. I started with a 100 grit, then moved up to a 180, then finished up all over using 240 to get a smooth finish and to avoid any swirl marks from the sanders. I turned the table on every side, sanding it from every angle with the 240. The grain on this little table was very prominent and dark, but I planned to use a white stain or a paint wash, so I decided to do a couple of coats of oxalic acid to further lighten the wood. I noticed when it gets wet, it turns really orange, and I want to avoid that as much as possible. I did 2 applications of the acid, letting it sit in the sun, then rinsed it off thoroughly before leaving it in the sun to dry. While the table was drying, I went up to my craft room and printed a nautical compass stencil to apply to the top using my Cricut maker. Getting the table wet, of course, had raised the grain, so I hand sanded using a 320 grit sanding pad before applying a coat of Minwax's pre-stain conditioner. I had chosen this table because it was a piece we already had that needed an update, and I thought it could be done quickly and somewhat easily, mostly using things I already had on hand. But little did I know that this is where this simple project would go completely off the skids. I had some stain I had purchased for another project that I ended up not doing. It's Dixie Belle's Voodoo Gel Stain, which is a water-based stain. And I'm typically not a fan of water-based stain, but I already had it, so I decided to use this instead of my planned paint wash. I was putting it on and wiping it back like any other stain, but it didn't really appear to be staining. It wants to just kind of sit on top of the wood, and I was having trouble getting it into the grain. I did find that by using a chip brush to apply it, I could brush it into the grain better, and to wipe it back very gently, leaving more of the stain behind. Once I was done, I ended up dry brushing a little bit of the stain to even up where it looked blotchy. And of course, because it's a water-based stain, I need to sand again afterwards. But I just did a light hand sand with a 240 grit sponge all over. I needed to tape off the top of the table so I could start priming and painting the top, but I was concerned about using tape on my newly stained legs, so I put a coat of spray-on top coat to protect them. I let it dry while I ran to the store to pick up some paint. I primed using Dixie Belle's Bonding Boss. It is great for really slick surfaces, and while I scuff sanded this top thoroughly, I still want to make sure that my paint adheres well. I applied 2 coats of the primer, sanding lightly between coats. I knew I wanted a blue paint. Nautical, beachy, it's gotta be blue. But I found this perfect paint color by Sherwin-Williams, and the name was just too fitting for this challenge. Ebb-Tide. I painted 2 coats of the Ebb-Tide paint, and I bought this flocked foam paint roller at our Lowe's while I was picking up my paint. It's by Whiz Applicators, and it says it gives you a premium spray-like finish, so I thought, I'm going to try it. And I gotta say, not disappointed at all. 2 thumbs up. However, 2 thumbs way down for the white gel stain I used. Even top coated, when I pulled off the tape after sanding, some of the stain came off with it. I've never had this happen with oil-based stains. They actually stain the wood and penetrate it. I had to touch those up, and I was not a happy flipper. Next morning, I affixed my prepared stencil to the top of the table. I used Waverly's chalk paint in the color Snow White and applied it using a sponge pouncer. All was going well until I went to remove the stencil, and most of the paint came off with it, plus what didn't come off had crackled. It was so hot outside, and I had a fan blowing on me and subsequently on the tabletop, so I think it dried the paint too quickly. When I do a stencil, I always remove it when the paint is still wet, so you get crisper lines and your paint doesn't pull away with the stencil. So, time to fall back and punt. I sanded off the failed stencil, then applied another coat of primer, sanded that, then 2 more coats of my Ebb-Tide paint. Starting over. Today was my dad's birthday. He'd be 96, and everything I learned about tenacity, I learned from him. So I'm trying again. I brought the table inside to redo the stencil so the paint wouldn't dry so quickly. I switched my paint to a plain acrylic paint that I had left over from another project. I also made my stencil a little smaller and chose a less detailed design, and success at last. To finish the piece off, I applied 2 coats of wipe-on poly in warm satin to the top. This project that was originally intended to be simple almost got the best of me, but I was determined to drag myself across the finish line and to bring this coffee table with me. I'd like to thank Jen at Copper Cactus DIY for hosting this challenge, my very first as a YouTuber. It's not completely how I envisioned it starting out, but I definitely think that this little table would fit into any beach home decor.